Do you know your in-house legal from your private practice? Your solicitor from your barrister? No? Well, stay tuned, because on today's show we're meeting with Katie, who is a general counsel and chief legal officer in the investment management industry. Katie is going to tell us all about her area of expertise. She's going to share her career journey with us and some excellent advice too. We talk about the Japanese concept of ikigai. We talk about why it's okay not to have a plan and to change your mind. We talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. We talk about why it's so important to stay open and curious. And of course, we take a deep dive into all things legal. So if that sounds great to you, fantastic. Katie and I will see you in the show. Katie, hello. Welcome to the show. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Hi, Jo. Thanks so much for having me and inviting me along.
My pleasure. All right. Well, how about we get started? Why don't you give us a short introduction? Tell us who you are, what you do, and how long you've been doing it for.
Sure. My name's Katie Smith. I am the general counsel of an investment fund, which means I'm its chief legal officer. And I have been a lawyer for just over 20 years, but a general counsel for about the last 7 or 8.
Wow. Thank you so much. Now, before we get into the main topic for today, this is a podcast. So if you're somebody that enjoys podcasts, tell us what you're enjoying right now.
I do love podcasts. I love ideas and I love voices and I love people. So podcasts are brilliant for me. I listen to loads of things on BBC Sounds, but the thing I always listen to, whether as a podcast or as a live program, is called In Our Time, which is Melvin Bragg's podcast about ideas. And they're always different things. So it can be from history to molecular biology to philosophy. And every week it's different. And every week it's a panel of experts talking about things that they know a lot about. And I learn so much from it.
Oh, that one sounds brilliant. I think one of the previous guests might have mentioned that one too, and I haven't checked it out yet. So I'm gonna do that after the show today. Thank you.
I highly recommend.
Oh, thank you. Okay, there's so many misconceptions about the work that we do. So I'd love to know about the common misconceptions of your role and what your friends and family who are perhaps outside of the industry think you do all day.
Okay, well, I am a lawyer, and obviously lawyers have a wonderful reputation in the world at large. But more specifically, I'm a lawyer that doesn't work in a law firm, and I don't go to court, but I do work in industry. So I help look after the legal risk for a company, and the types of companies I work for are in financial services. But probably the best example of what someone thought I did was my granny. When I first left working in a big law firm, I went to work in-house in industry in a big bank called Barclays. Yeah. And my granny thought I'd given it all up to go and work in a branch. And she said to me, darling, it's okay if the law wasn't your thing. If you want to help people being behind the counter, counting out the money, that's the best thing ever. So, my granny thought I was a bank teller. During lockdown, I think my children think I'm just a meetings machine. They say, all you do is go to meetings. What's that about? And when I try to explain my role, it can be, because it's really broad, and maybe we'll touch on that. Yeah. It's endlessly interesting, but it's very hard, therefore, to put it into one box.
Yeah. Oh, that's helpful. Thank you very much. And Katie, you're working in the financial services industry and investment management. I wonder if you could give us a high-level overview of that industry.
Yeah, investment management is probably the part of financial services which will impact your long-term life the most, but it's often the one that you know least about. So what does investment management do? Well, it really helps people save for their long-term future dreams. And sometimes that's directly. You can be a direct client of an investment manager, save your money with them, open an ISA, invest it in stocks and shares, or your pension funds more typically are in the hands of investment managers who will invest them and look to grow your pension fund pot. So I've worked in lots of bits of financial services. And when I was thinking about which bit I wanted to stay in, a colleague who was based in California said to me, as far as looking at yourself in the mirror goes and being comfortable with the choices you've made, helping people save for a happy retirement, or to send their children to university, or to take a couple of years off and travel the world is really not a bad place to be. And his name was Randall, and Randall's words have stuck with me ever since.
Yeah, and I think that's really great advice, isn't it? Because I think like the legal profession, financial services can be very broad, and sometimes there is a misconception that all of financial services is one thing and that one thing is bad. But as you've just described, this part of financial services is actually really, really great, and it's helping people, and it is important people to know the differences.
Absolutely, really broad. And I think quite often I didn't, when I was thinking about careers, to try and break down how you interact with financial services every day along the way. Every time you tap your debit card onto something to buy something, if you still use cash, whether you take cash out of the wall, if you want a student loan, if you eventually want to borrow some money to buy a flat, or do anything more than that, like start to save for your future, financial services is there at every step. It's an enormous world, and lots of it is very different to each other. So when you're thinking about it, it really gives you the opportunity to find a bit that resonates with you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, so back to the role of general counsel and legal. If you had to describe it in a couple of sentences, what does the firm or the firm's clients rely on general counsel for?
So the general counsel is the chief legal officer, but what does that really mean? I break it down into the sorts of things I do every day. So I give legal advice on the most strategic, senior and tricky aspects of our business. And a lot of that is about listening to people, and who are the kinds of people I listen to from pretty much all over the organisation. But my principal client is the board of the organisation and its chief executive and chairman. So I spend a lot of time advising people at the most senior level. So sometimes I feel like I'm a solver of problems. Sometimes I'm hopefully a bringer of wise advice. Sometimes you're a bit of a secrets keeper, because you have to sort of carry all of these things and try and advise people on the best way forward, knowing not everyone can know what you're thinking about. And the real privilege of my role, what I really enjoy about it, is that there are very few roles in an organisation that have the hover level view of the entire company. Everything I get involved with free ranges across every part of the business. So along with the chief executive officer, you're able to look at all of the risks across the business and join it all up together to say, are we healthy? Are we running well? Some general counsels, including me, have a slightly broader role and can also look after other departments, whether that's the governance department, which says how well an organisation is being run from a board and meetings perspective. Compliance, I look after our compliance team as well. Compliance is your company following all the rules and regulations you're required to, and in industries which are heavily regulated, like financial services, or medical industries, or aviation, or anything involving food, that's really important. And then I also look after the risk department, and business risk is about ensuring that our risks are well managed and controlled. So lots of overlap in those, but I would summarize it by saying it's, are we in good order? Are we well balanced? Are we doing anything accidentally risky? And if we are, how do we manage away from that?
Yeah. Oh, that's really helpful. Thank you very much. And Katie, you're leading these big departments, as you've just mentioned. And I think sometimes we can be guilty of thinking that, a role in legal is just one thing, similarly to the role of HR. But of course, there are many sort of work streams within the HR function, like there are within a legal function. So I wonder if you might be able to share a typical structure of that department, and the types of roles that sit within it for the audience.
Yeah, I mean, law, I think like medicine or HR or anywhere else where you become a technical specialist has a lot of different slices of technical specialism. But very broadly, within any organization, you will tend to have lawyers who are focused on your clients. So whatever client group you're in, they'll be looking at the contracts and the relationships you have with clients, setting them up, looking out for them during the life cycle, and dealing with any issues along the way. You'll also have people who focus on legal relationships with your suppliers. In my world, my suppliers pop up in all sorts of different ways. So we access the financial markets a lot. So dealing with capital markets, buying and selling, shares and other forms of instruments. But we also have relationships with big suppliers, other big banks who provide us services. So lawyers will look after that. And then you have lawyers that will look after the general corporate aspects of a company. So working with HR, looking after all the employees, looking after our corporate structures when we buy and sell companies ourselves, how we do that. If we end up in any litigation, so if anyone takes legal action against us or we want to take legal action, lawyers will be involved there. And finally, you'll have lawyers who are involved in implementing legal change. Laws and regulations change all the time, and we need to keep an eye on that, map that, and implement it into our organisations. So very diverse, lots of different ways, and my job is to help bring all of that up together.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you very much. Okay, so Katie, zooming in on an average day or week, what might we find you doing?
Well, I don't have an average day, and I think that's one of the joys of it. Every day is different. I think it can be broadly split though into the things that you know are coming and the things that you don't know are coming. So I will spend a large proportion of my time helping control and govern the business in a way so that it's well looked after, and a lot of that will mean attending board meetings, attending committee meetings. What does that really mean? Well, that means deep diving into the way that the organisation is being run, having a chance to speak with the people reporting to you on that, and prodding and poking in the nicest way to make sure that all is in order. I spend a lot of my time, and one of the brilliant things about leading any group of people are the people you work with. It's a real privilege and a pleasure. I spend a lot of time working with my senior leadership team to help them problem solve or understand the issues that they're facing, so we can try and unblock any issues that might be arising, or be there just as a form of support and review. I will spend time talking with law firms. I'll spend time talking with clients. I'll spend time speaking to areas of the business that might be looking to grow and develop. Or perhaps sometimes the opposite, so we can sort things out in an orderly way. So that's the planful stuff. And then there's the unexpected, which you always have to have time for, because an issue can emerge on anything. And if there is a problem, whether it's a good problem or a challenging problem, a general counsel is usually right in the thick of it, helping try and construct solutions to that problem. So problem solving and creativity is a big part of my role as well.
Yeah. Oh, thank you very much. And I guess zooming out, what things might, I guess, come up throughout the year that the audience might like to know about? Oh,
I suppose, you never know. That's the interesting thing about it, and it's one of the things that made me want to move in house. Actually, it was the real wide variety of different types of tasks that I can get involved with, but slightly more predictably. One thing that you're very heavily involved with is setting the strategy of the company every year. The strategy is obviously blessed and established by the board, but the general counsel is one of the senior business leaders who will be helping develop and generate that strategy and then working to implement it. So all of the different projects that we'll be doing as an organisation will be linked to our strategy. And lawyers and other parts of my teams as well will all be involved busily implementing that. So you are able to chart what you're doing against what you hope to be doing and how that will make a difference for your clients, which can all sound a little bit nebulous, which is why the industry you work in is really important. Because if you work in a company that really makes you excited, that gives you joy and thinks, for me, could make a difference for people, then that makes whatever pops up, whether predictable or unpredictable, just seem really relevant and that you're adding value there.
Yeah, thank you very much. And you just touched on the the difference between working in-house and externally. So it'd be really nice if you could kind of just highlight the key differences there.
Yeah, so when you work in a law firm, in private practice, you would typically have lots and lots of different clients who would come to you for advice. And they could be in similar industries or from multiple industries, but they're likely to be lots and lots and lots of them if you're lucky and successful. I have one big client, which is the organisation I am employed to work in. So I work for one company, and I might have lots of different internal clients who come to me for advice, but they all represent one company's interests. So general counsels tend to be employees. Actually, the organisation I work in is partnership, so I'm a partner, but we tend to be in one specialist focused organisation rather than working for a law firm that hopes to have lots of different clients.
Yeah, okay, that's really helpful. Thank you very much. Okay, Katie, what do you love most about your role?
What I love most is the people. I mean, for me, it's always been about the people. And as much as financial services and investment management, and sometimes when you see it on TV, it's just dealing rooms and, people shouting over computers and talking about algorithms and as much as it draws heavily on technological innovation, investment management is a people industry. Investment managers are successful because of the caliber of their people. And ultimately, the most important thing is that we serve individual investors. So people draw me to anything. I am really lucky to work with a wonderful group of people, to lead a wonderful group of people. And of course, when you think about law, sitting underneath all of the contracts that the people who work with me write, all the decisions that get made, which could be good or bad and create legal risk, whether that's an unhappy employee or a contract that's misfunctioning or an unhappy client, they're all driven by people and their decisions. So as much as people can often have the understanding, and a lot of it is true, that a lot of what a lawyer does is about working with legal agreements, problem solving, and trying to come up with a sensible way forward, you're also keeping a smart eye on culture and behaviours and trying to regularize or make sure that people's behaviour is in a good, orderly fashion.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. And I just wanted to circle back to something you mentioned in the introduction, that you know, having this hover view of the organisation. My observation when I've worked very closely with legal teams is, yes, you're right, that it is often at the heart of what's going on. So I'd love to hear about how a legal team might collaborate with all of the different parts of the organisation. Who might be the key collaborators and so on.
Yeah, I think if you're in an organisation which is lucky enough to have an in-house legal team, it is really important to come to them early and to use them in this way. So I think when any organisation is trying to plan something, they're sort of drawing up a blueprint for it. Lawyers and compliance officers and risk managers are technicians. So really bring in those technical people at the start to help put the technical architecture into your blueprints for your project. So we can work with everybody in the organisation. So if you want to build a new business line, you need the lawyers in from the start to help you create appropriate corporate structures, to get them permissioned with the relevant regulators, to get them licensed with other forms of controlling organizations. You need to write contracts with people. You need to hire people, which needs lawyers to write employment contracts. If you want pretty much anything, actually, has law and regulation underpinning it. And, in financial services, everything is regulated. The business is regulated. So we are in everything, which again is a real joy and a privilege, because you get to be involved in everything. But I also appreciate, for people listening to me right now, it might mean, God, that's so vast. What does it actually mean? And I would encourage people to say again, if you can find an industry that you think is really interesting to you, being an in-house lawyer in that industry allows you to really understand it from the outside in and then the inside out, because you have to completely get your arms around it.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. All right. We touched on what you love most about the role. Tell us what you find most challenging about the role.
What I love the most can be the most challenging as well, which is you can be pulled in a whole variety of ways, and a whole your time can be commanded by people who equally need you at the same time. So it's, how do you prioritize? How do you triage? How do you deal with what's the most urgent and the most important in front of you? And that's where you're really reliant on having brilliant people who work with you, so that when things come up to you, they're being escalated in a way which allows you to be able to put your focus on it. Something I don't find challenging, but I know some of my colleagues do. And they are colleagues who perhaps really love law. I didn't originally set out to be a lawyer. I did something else first, became a lawyer later. But I know that for friends of mine who love law, at these sort of levels, you don't spend a lot of time with the black letter of the law. You don't necessarily sit there with statute books out, drafting, formulating a legal view. Your job is to quickly synthesize the expertise that you've been given by others, whether that's an external law firm's opinion or the opinions of your colleagues, and your job is to mush them together and come up with what you think is the best answer. But I'm fine with that. But if you're someone who loves law, you don't spend a lot of time in the law so much anymore as a general counsel.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for sharing. All right, Katie, let's go all the way back to the beginning. When you were young, what did you want to do when you were grown up?
I wanted to be an astronaut.
Yeah.
I'm not sure there have been any Welsh astronauts, but I quite wanted to do that. For a long time, I wanted to be a midwife. But with both of those things, I was never really terribly good at science. So I didn't follow a sort of science background. And then actually the job I originally thought about doing, my undergraduate degree was in theology and religious studies, and I thought I wanted to be a vicar. And I didn't end up doing that, and I'm happy to share more about that. But I needed to find another job quite quickly, so that's what started to lead me towards the law. But I didn't set out with a desire to be a lawyer. I didn't, I sort of about it, but it wasn't the thing that was going to float my boat. Then I came to it later.
Yeah. So tell us about, when you were making choices of what to study at uni, what inspired you to take that route? And I guess, and also, who were you talking to about careers at this stage?
For my A-levels, I found myself, because I wasn't good at science, I did humanities A-levels. So subjects like English and history and religious studies and the social sciences, that's where I drew my interest. Again, I think because I was just really interested in people, and people sit at the heart of many of those subjects. So I knew I liked writing. I knew I was good with words. I knew I was good with drawing meaning and inference out of the written word. And then you can sort of start to see how that becomes interest in law later. But I didn't really know what to do. So I went to university to study history originally. I love history, and again, human experience. But when I was at university, my interest started to change a little bit.
Yeah.
And ended up switching my undergraduate degree to theology.
Yeah. And how that I'm guessing might have felt like a big deal at the time. So how did you deal with that switch, and did you get good counsel around that move?
I'm probably a really poor exemplar of people who are good at getting advice, because I just didn't. I thought, this is what I thought. And so I would always encourage people to get advice, but and making the change wasn't necessarily a sensible thing to have done on paper. I went to a really brilliant university, and the college I was at within that university has a really preeminent history reputation. So I was in an extremely well-regarded department. Wow. Yeah. But I knew that I probably had one shot at enjoying undergraduate years. Yeah. I enjoyed history, but I thought there was something else that I might enjoy more, which has elements of history in it. So I thought, well, why not just be brave and seize the opportunity? So maybe with hindsight, I ought to have spoken to a few more people. And of course, I couldn't just unilaterally make the change. I had to go and speak to, the directors of studies involved in both subjects. But for me, I instinctively knew it was right. I think if you want to rely on your instinct at the age of 19, you need to be quite sure of it. So I wouldn't always recommend it. And, as the mum of people about to go off to university, I think I might sort of a little bit, but but it felt right for me at the time. Yeah.
And once you'd made that change and you were, in your studies, I'm guessing there were signs that, I've really made the right call here. What were those signs that gave you that confirmation?
It was just joy and interest in what I was doing. And I just loved it. And I was chatting with an old university friend who also became a lawyer but didn't study law recently. And she said, you were very funny at university because you seem to be much more defined by your subject than the rest of us who are still studying history. That's how we had originally met. And I thought that was a criticism, or she was calling me a bit of a nerd. I wasn't sure, but in a loving way. But when I reflect on it, I think what she meant was I just got a lot from my subject and I really enjoyed it. And I did. I just found it totally fascinating and I was happy to study it day in, day out. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. So when you were coming towards the end of your studies, religious studies and theology, what happened next?
I thought I wanted to be a Church of England vicar, and women becoming Church of England vicars hadn't been around for terribly long, so it was still quite new-ish. And of course, when you're talking about a career which is a calling, it's a slightly different career path. So you go and you speak with other people involved in the church to try and go through a process to help you discern whether you are appropriately called or not. So I started two things on the path towards discernment, which is the process towards training to become a vicar. And then I also had a place lined up to start to do a master's with a view to doing a PhD, again in religious studies. Switching university, but in a field that I found super interesting. So that was the plan. But then when you're dealing with things which are, like a spiritual matter or something which exists beyond a, postgraduate kind of job application round, what happened to me in that summer between graduating and going off to start postgraduate studies was I had what I think you'd call a crisis of faith, and I didn't know what I believed anymore, if indeed anything. So I spent a whole several months sitting with it and wrestling with it and thinking, what is the point, or is it appropriate for me to continue on this path
Yeah.
I don't really know. So I dropped out. Actually, I dropped out of everything. And I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I did know that the burden of trying to work out whether I wanted to continue was not very positive, and not very inspiring. So I thought I need to stop. So I dropped out. I had nothing to do. So I followed my boyfriend to London because that's all I had going on.
Yeah. So then what happened? Because you obviously did find your way.
Yeah. I took a bit of time to think about things. And then I did manage to speak to someone who was wise and thoughtful. I spoke to my dad, who is in a profession. My dad is an accountant. He's not a lawyer. But he said to me, with his tongue in his cheek at the time, I think, he said, "Why don't you become a lawyer? You'll never starve if you've got a profession," which was possibly humour or possibly the panicked reaction of a parent wondering what this slightly discombobulated kid is going to do with the rest of their lives. But I did stop and think about law. And what I actually thought was, and you park for 1 minute, belief. But if you look at religious systems, religious behaviour, what religions often are sets of rules to help normalise behaviour in structures.
Yeah.
And what is law? They're sets of rules to help normalise behaviours in societal structures. So they're not a million miles apart from each other. So I thought, all right, then I'll give it a whirl. And not having a law degree meant that in order to train as a solicitor, which is what I am rather than a barrister, I needed to go and do some postgraduate qualifications, a year extra to gain a postgraduate diploma in law, and then a practical year, which really looks at some of the pre-training skills that you needed. So I had a number of friends who were training as solicitors, asked them how they had gone about finding firms that they liked the look of, and going through that application process. So I started study, but before I started, I had something called a training contract lined up for 2 years later, which would be the last 2 years of training to become a solicitor. I did those 2 years in London in postgraduate training, and then I went to work in a city law firm. So in one of the large law firms in the City of London, which specialises in supporting large companies. I actually trained in a law firm with a reputation for litigation. And I thought, again, because I'm good at constructing arguments, good at writing, good at talking, not after you've listened to this, but, I thought that's what I'll be. I'll be an advocate in some way. And I was wholly surprised when I popped out the other side of my training 4 years later, and I was a corporate finance lawyer, and I really liked corporate structures, and I liked the practical cut and thrust of company law.
Yeah. Right, thank you. And actually now might be a really good time to just pause and if you wouldn't mind just sharing again a typical law firm, what I guess streams of work or structures do they typically have? Because I think that again we can think of a lawyer as just one thing, but of course they can specialise in many different things. So that might be nice to shed a little light on, please.
Yeah. And I think you need to there are many different types of law firms. The type of law firm I trained in, a large, corporate commercial law firm, a city law firm, will be very different from the firms of solicitors, which might specialise in the kind of work that individuals need. So we could look briefly at those to start with. There are law firms where you'll have lawyers and members of my family specialise in this area who are criminal lawyers. So they, look after people, support them through the process of being charged and tried for a criminal offence. Also in law firms, you can find people who are very focused on helping individuals through lots of different parts of their life. So whether you want to buy a house, so, whether you're doing a property law, whether you're helping people with getting married before they get married, or maybe if they no longer want to be married and they want to get divorced, or if they want to have legal arrangements to do with children, whether that's adoption or surrogacy arrangements, or rather, as people think about the end of their life, wanting help with their wills. So they're very much law firms focused on individuals. The type of law firm I trained in is very much focused on industry, and within those law firms, which tend to be pretty large and have lots of lawyers, because the complexity associated with those types of companies can be significant. So in those big law firms, you'll have departments focused on establishing companies, buying and selling companies, buying and selling financial instruments. Then you'll have departments who are focused on when things go wrong. So litigation departments, when you have to deal with a dispute, and is that going to go all the way to court, or is it going to be resolved through other means like mediation or arbitration? And then you'll find very specialist parts of those law firms which support and provide technical advice into much larger projects like employment law departments, pensions law departments, insurance departments, pretty much any kind of department, media law, or intellectual property law. Wherever we are in life, there is usually a legal right or a risk associated with it, and you'll find a lawyer who is well equipped to support you in that. So they're vast, and the challenge when you're training, when you don't know a lot about the law, is, well, what on earth am I interested in within it, and how do I get exposure to it? And therefore, the type of law firm you train at is important, because it can give you a sense or not of whether you're going to be able to get access to expertise that you're going to find interesting.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. And I think it's really nice to have it broken down into that almost, there are firms that focus on the life cycle of an individual, and then there are firms that focus on industry. I think that's a really helpful distinction. And the other thing I'd just love to know, and I'm sure others would too, who might not be so plugged in, but, what is the key difference between the solicitor, the barrister, and perhaps anything else I'm thinking of there?
And I'm sure if you're chatting with a barrister, they would answer it really differently to the way I'm about to. But I think the distinctions and differences are changing. So when I first became a solicitor, solicitors' ability to undertake advocacy in the higher courts was really limited. That changed. And so now you can be something called a solicitor advocate. So you are able to represent your clients in the higher courts in the country. Where I see the real difference in the work that friends of mine who are barristers do is it's that very detailed, focused, technical expertise. And in some ways they are, and in some ways not. But in many ways, I think it's akin to a slightly academic relationship with the law, because when we want an access to barristers, we want their very specialist, plugged in view on an area of law which isn't clear cut. So what would their advice be on how this would go, and how a judge might experience it if it were to go to court? In terms of advocacy skills, I think on the whole, barristers tend to be the ones spending a lot more time day in, day out in court, although, there are solicitor advocates now. So it is that, if you like, standing up and debating, arguing a case in a courtroom, perhaps becoming a barrister is the way forward. Although if you want to be a solicitor, you're not precluded from doing that. You can still do that these days.
Yeah, well, that's great. Thank you. And just one more question while we're on this topic. If you're an advocate, can you defend somebody in that position, or is that something different? Well, I suppose on both sides you're defending, aren't you? Yeah.
So solicitor advocates can defend those who are charged with crimes in the same way that a barrister would as well. So quite often, if you've been charged with an offence, depending on the severity of it, you might just need a solicitor. You might need a solicitor advocate, or you might want to have a barrister representing you. Sometimes it's the complexity, the severity of the offence, but maybe the details of law that sit within it, which will dictate the answer there.
Yeah. Thank you. And if you're in that solicitor advocate role, can you also advocate for the victim as well as the defendant? Or is that a different role?
Yeah. So it's almost a political statement I'm about to make now, Jo, but victims in a criminal offence don't have separate representation. So the action against a proposed criminal would be taken by the Crown Prosecution Service, so the government agency which acts to bring actions. So if you're charged in an offence, I would be charged by the police. The Crown Prosecution Service would then determine whether there should be a prosecution. If there is a prosecution, it would be a Crown Prosecution Service sort of prosecutor who would take it forward, and they can be solicitors or barristers. Either employed by the CPS or sometimes retained separately by the CPS, because most barristers are self-employed. That's important to hang on to. And then the defendant would be represented by their team that we've just been talking about. Victims really form a part in the criminal justice process at trial of being a witness. So they don't have separate representation.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. See, it's so complicated. This is why this podcast is hopefully going to be so helpful for people. Thank you. Okay.
Which isn't to say that no, I was just going to say, it isn't to say that victims don't have any help. So it's probably a different podcast, but there are people who will work within the system to provide support to victims, often especially trained police officers, and sometimes therapists too. And I think it's a fascinating and really important subject. So maybe you can find an amazing person to chat with you about that.
Thank you. Yeah, great advice. Thank you. That's really helpful.
Sure.
Okay, well, back to your journey. So you do your 2 further years of study, and then you complete your 2-year training contract, and realise corporate finance is the area for you. And so what did you love about corporate finance?
Yeah, so I specialised in how can you be specialist when you're that green in your career? But what I did a lot of was mergers and acquisitions, which is the buying and selling of different companies and groups of companies. And what I really loved about it at that level was how broad it was. So I worked across the potential buying and selling of big confectionery companies to potential buying and selling of private banks and everything in between. And I think fundamentally what I have is just a really short attention span, or maybe I just like lots of different things. But when you are looking on buying and selling a company, especially at the more junior end of things, you're often sent in to do something called due diligence, which is actually understanding the company, its operations, and where the legal risks might sit across all of that. Yeah. So you get to look at all of the different departments, all of the people-related issues, all of the things that might go bump in the night within it, and all of the ways in which the company might be valued. And ultimately, your assessment on that risk helps inform how much somebody might be willing to pay for that company. And then there are a whole suite of long and complex sale and purchase agreements that can sit alongside it. What I really loved was understanding companies and how they worked and all of the different departments. And really, that's still what I do. I work in a company. I try and understand how it works across all of the different departments. So that's what I really loved about it. And I did that in private practice for about 5 years.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. And I guess for somebody in the audience who perhaps doesn't understand the concept of mergers and acquisitions, I'm thinking of a really easy and pertinent one, as in, Facebook buying Instagram, I guess would be an example of an acquisition.
Yeah, absolutely. Spot on.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. All right. So what happens next?
I really like the subject matter of what I'm doing, but I'm not sure that I want to stay in a law firm, and I'm not sure. And it's not about not wanting to be in a law firm, but it's something else, which is quite early in my career, I got the chance to go in-house for 6 months to a client. So the law firm I worked for sent me on a secondment. So they lent me out for 6 months to a telecoms company that was a big client. And I spent 6 months in their in-house department, and I loved it. I just thought it was really diverse. No day was the same. What I really liked was the direct contact with clients. Someone would wander by your desk and ask you for your advice straight up. Whereas appropriately, in a law firm, your advice is one step removed. It's often quite laboriously put together and subject to lots and lots of review. That's important quality control and risk management. Not saying that's a bad thing, but that sort of immediate kind of giving of advice to someone comes a bit later in your career development. Probably as you become a very senior associate or perhaps a partner. I really liked the practical application. It's like, hello, you've just got out of the lift and I'd like to talk to you about this. I like the immediacy and the proximity. So I finished my secondment, went back to the law firm for another few years, but the positive experiences remained with me. And I thought I'd quite like to get back to that at an appropriate time. So relatively early in a career, I would say, I moved in-house, and I moved in-house to a big bank who was a client of the organization I worked for. So I moved in-house, great. But I would say I was in a sort of quasi in-house role because I went into a big bank to do mergers and acquisitions. So I was doing similar work, working across all of the different businesses that bank owned, whether that was investment management, where I am still, whether it was retail banking. So, that's branches of Lloyd's and Barclays that you see on the high street or, on your app, retail banking, or investment banking, which are the way that those enormous global banks are accessing capital markets. So I looked at buying and selling businesses across all of those different types of industry. And what that allowed me to do was really have a think about which part of financial services I'd quite like to end up. And after a few years of doing that, I asked to go on secondment to our investment management business. And I loved that investment management business because they're very thoughtful, they're very client focused, they're very innovative and creative. And they seem to have a lovely culture about them. So I asked to go on secondment to see what it was like to be in-house there all the time. And I didn't ever go back.
Thank you. And culture is really important in the organisations that we work in. And could you maybe kind of call out a couple of, nuances between the culture of a bank and an asset manager or an investment manager?
Sometimes they can be pretty similar, and I would. Everybody says they're client centric, and for me that's really important. That we put our clients at the hearts of our decision making. That we're always there for the clients, and I have, you'll see it on everyone's website. If client centricity is really important to you, as an individual and the companies you're working for, I think you really have to test that because everybody says it, but yet not everybody is. I think, the big cultural difference, I would say, between investment banking and asset management is something that's often called the difference between being the buy side and the sell side, or being fiduciary or not fiduciary. And what on earth does all of that labeling stuff mean? For an investment manager, we're never looking after our own money. We're not investing our own money. We are investing somebody else's money, somebody's pension fund, somebody's savings. So we have a duty and a responsibility to look after that. Sometimes it's, especially in the States, it's called a fiduciary responsibility. So we charge a fee for that, but it's not our money at risk. Often in other organisations, sometimes particularly investment banking, but again, not exclusively because these business lines are so nuanced. There can be more of a proprietary thing going on, i.e. they're putting their own money at risk. And that can be a big motivator in terms of risk appetite, how aggressive somebody might be willing to be. I don't mean physically aggressive. I mean in relation to how brave they want to be, or the limits they want to be taking, and the risk they want to be taking with other people's money. There is, I think, inherently a need to perhaps be a little bit more cautious in the investment management world, and the supporting regulations are built around that sense of appropriate conservative behaviour, risk where it's properly flagged and warranted, versus if it's your own money at risk, then, it's a slightly different approach. So I think that's, for me, has always been the big cultural difference. But I would say that after some of the enormous cultural scandals that happened, and that we saw in the play out in the global financial crisis in particular, many financial services organisations, in fact, I would say most, have done a lot to steady their approach to risk management, to have more appropriate risk appetite, to be much more thoughtful about culture, and to try and rein in inappropriate behaviours which could spin out of control into risk. Yeah,
thank you. So you're now in investment management. So what happens next?
So the investment management company that I work for, which is the investment manager of a large British bank, of Barclays Bank, a firm called Barclays Global Investors, is bought by the world's biggest investment manager, BlackRock. And what was fascinating for me is, having been an M&A lawyer for pretty much all of my career, I'm now someone being sold. So instead of doing the buying and selling, I'm sitting in a business being sold. And we are bought by BlackRock, and I actually remain working for BlackRock for many years, which was a fabulous organisation to work for. And what that offered me, BlackRock is so big, and I always think it's just the most brilliant place. It's like a university of asset management. You can learn everything there. You can work on pretty much any type of fund structure, so many different types of client structures. I found it fabulous. The people were really terrific, and I just learned heaps and heaps there. But the biggest thing that changed whilst I was at BlackRock was that one day somebody tapped me on the shoulder and they said, we think you are a natural leader, and we would like you to explore your leadership capabilities. And in particular, we would like you to think about taking part in this women's senior development program that we have. I had never thought about leadership of people at all up until that point. I wasn't entirely sure what leadership was. And I remember thinking, well, is it Churchill? Is it Boadicea? Is it something in between? I had no idea. But again, I really like people. And I've always enjoyed working well with people, developing people, helping people. Helping is a big part of what I've always wanted to do, whether, aged 8, thinking I'd quite like to be a midwife, or what I do now, which is I help people solve problems. So at BlackRock, I start to develop my leadership capabilities and end up leading a team of lawyers.
Oh, wow. What a great program. And I think that that's a great example of how sometimes one person, or I guess probably more than one person, but somebody else's belief in us can sometimes take us in a direction that we hadn't necessarily thought we were going to go in or would be ready for yet.
Absolutely. And, also the ability at that moment in time to stop and think, well, what am I being told here? And what I need to be is open and curious about it. And it's starting to lead groups of people. And what I do now is lead groups of people. I'm not a technical expert in a lot of what they do, but, hopefully they would say I'm a good leader. It gives you a completely different way of experiencing your career.
I think most of the audience leadership might not be on their radar for a few years, but perhaps it would be really nice if you could share with us perhaps the biggest difference between being an individual contributor or a specialist and moving into a leadership role, and how that was for you.
Yeah, I think, what I reflect on the most is just the sense of responsibility that I have with it, because other people's careers are in your hands. You are responsible for the big things that happen to them in the office, as well as hopefully being there to help with the smaller things that happen. You are responsible for setting a sense of purpose for them, for the whole group. This is what we're looking to achieve together, and this is how we're going to try and row along. And within that, looking at with the idea of a boat, looking at the people who sit in the individual seats in that boat, working with them. How are we going to develop your career? How are we going to help you reach your potential? How can we help unlock what you want next? Whether that's career development, or whether that, i.e. a different role, or finding something which interests you so we can help you grow and learn.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so you've now completed this program, and you're leading a team. What happens next?
I stayed there for a little while, but I was lucky enough to sort of add and grow to my leadership portfolio. So I started to lead teams, not just based in London where I worked, but based more across Europe. And I started to widen my expertise net as well, advising in different types of law. And then I also started to sit on company boards myself. So I was asked to join the board of one of the internal funds at BlackRock, which was fascinating. Really different to move from being an advisor to a board to being the director, yourself, with that responsibility, working with others. But then I reached the point where I thought about, well, where does my next moment of career development come? And I had a really interesting opportunity come my way, which I wasn't expecting, but having someone chat to me about it, I thought, wow, I started to pursue it. So I left the law for a little bit, and I used my legal expertise and my regulatory expertise and my leadership expertise, and I moved to work for a large bank in their asset management division as the global head of compliance for that division. So managing risk, not legal risk, but regulatory risk, through a wonderful team of people all across the world. And so again, coming up and having that hover level view of all of the different types of compliance risk, the regulatory risk that was popping up in all of the different places we were active. And we were active from Australia all the way around to New York and everywhere in between. So I did that for a number of years, and that was fascinating.
Yeah, wow. And how did you, I guess that might have been a learning curve to I guess go from looking after a European business to a global business in terms of your remit. So how did you kind of get up that learning curve?
By listening more than I talked, by drawing on the wisdom of the really smart professionals who worked with me in those jurisdictions, being honest about what I didn't know, but also being honest about what I could bring them. So I might not know about these particular regulations in Taiwan, but I can, still be supportive to you because I can escalate risk. I can have senior level discussions. I can help drive to resolution. And then pretty much, and what I do a lot of, and I think anybody operating in risk management at these levels does lots of, is actually looking for the commonality of patterns. So pretty much all regulators globally are looking to have, in financial services, good, orderly markets where people can have trust and confidence in them. If you start from those first principles and work downwards, then you can start to spot patterns. So lots of regulators at the time, this is just after the financial crisis, lots of them are concerned about appropriate behaviours, conduct, and you start to see regimes pop up across the world seeking to normalise behaviours in those ways. And although they're all very different, they're all driving after the same root cause. So looking for patterns and joining the dots.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Okay, so what happens next?
And then I moved to a first general counsel's job. So I loved doing compliance, and I think actually being a compliance officer for a while made me a better lawyer. And this is why. So I think in many ways, when you're a lawyer, your job is to find an answer to the solution, to the problem in front of you, rather. You want the solution. And I'm going to use my hands a bit now. I use my hands too much, but I'm going to do it a bit. So when I'm thinking like a lawyer, I think I sort of swirl around, form an argument, and then try and join it all together and present a beautifully crafted argument which says why this must happen. What compliance taught me was the discipline of process, which is not where I will go to naturally. My background is the arts and arguing and, writing an essay and all of that stuff. I don't think in process, but process is how to ensure that things are well controlled. So I was able to bring the critical and analytical skills I developed as a lawyer and then grow that process and control. What is the issue? What are we trying to do? How do we make sure it's balanced and well controlled? And how do we evidence that? Brilliant. Felt like I had grown a lot from that. The organisation I worked in, for very good reasons, kept legal and compliance very separate. And I did miss being a lawyer a bit. So I started to think, well, it would be nice to bring those disciplines together somehow, legal and compliance, because I think there's a lot of commonality. Synergy would probably be the buzzword. If we were playing business buzzword bingo, they are very much sister disciplines. And if you put them together, and I'm not saying that, everybody does the same job, but if you align them, there can be great power in making sure that things are well controlled. So again, I had another phone call fortuitously, which said, would you be interested in a general counsel's role, which had legal and compliance in it, and which also happened to have another close sister discipline, which was government affairs, which is lobbying in it as well. And I thought, brilliant. Still in the same industry, another large global player, an organisation called Vanguard, who are a wonderful, highly client-aligned organisation. And I went there and I was their general counsel for the European region there for a number of years. Was able to grow again. So lots of my asset management experience previously had been working with large, sophisticated corporate clients. We would call them institutions. Vanguard's business is very retail focused, individual save. And, learning some of the risks, legal requirements, regulations around that was a big growth area for me there as we developed and grew our business. So love that. Got a lot from it. Wonderful place.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. And then, of course, that brings you where you are today.
Yeah. Which is similar but different. I am still a general counsel, but I took the decision probably just over a year ago to move to a different organisation, which does fundamentally the same business but is a lot smaller. And why did I choose that? Well, I went back to school for a bit and I developed my thinking in lots of ways. So I went to London Business School for a while. And I did a senior development program there, which is a wonderful thing to do. And when I was doing it, it gave me the opportunity to reflect on, as an individual, what I get most out of my work day, and who had been influential on me, and what was important for the next stage in my career. And a couple of things, 2 images popped into my mind. The first was when I worked for a large investment bank, and I had the most beautiful office. It had glass on 3 sides. I had very expensive artwork on the wall. I had an enormously large parking space, next to the CEO's where his chauffeur would park, and I had never felt perhaps more irrelevant in my whole career. In the sense of, I knew I did a good job, and I like to think I was highly regarded, but I also thought if I were not here, they would find another very good managing director to do this job as well. And then I contrasted that with my lovely dad, who I've spoken about before. He had sold his business. He'd set up his own accountancy firm about 30 years earlier, not as large as this global investment bank. And as he was selling it, I observed the relevance that he had to the people who'd worked with him for such a long time, the clients that he had, and how he had impacted and changed their lives for the better. And I thought, maybe it's somewhere smaller that I need to be in order to be more impactful, not from an ego perspective, but I wanted to be part of a team that was effectively growing something to the next level. So I now work in a wonderful organization, which is a large and sophisticated asset manager in terms of the number of billions of assets that we manage. But we are growing. We're 400 people rather than 4 or 40,000 people. We're headquartered in London, where I'm now based again. And I feel like I'm part of something which is building and growing, and that gives me tremendous satisfaction. And it allows me to take, that abstracted notion of a bit of law in a statute book, and how actually you can take that and you plug it into something very practical, which translates into a business which we're growing together in service of our clients.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you very much. Oh,
you're welcome.
Katie, when you look back on your career journey to date, what's been the high?
I think it's all a joy. So I almost don't think about it in terms of highs and lows, because it's all an experience, and it's all, oh gosh, what a hackneyed phrase. It's all a journey, right?
Yeah.
But I didn't plan any of it. I didn't plan any of it. And I always tried to remain open to possibilities, which is not to say in a kind of unthoughtful way I had a go at everything. And, if you chuck enough stuff at the wall, something will stick. I just thought, what am I good at? And what might make me happy and give me a sense of fulfillment? And if I can combine those things, brilliant. There's a Japanese term for it. I think it's ikagi, but I only found that out afterwards. I'd sort of been stumbling around doing that. So I feel really lucky to have had opportunity come my way. I know that you will also get opportunity come your way if you're good at what you do. It's all just a continuum for me.
Yeah. Staying open and curious. I think that's great advice. Yeah. What about if you were to call out, I guess, a challenge of the career journey, or a failure you had to overcome, or limiting beliefs? Is there anything you'd like to share there?
I think it can be tricky sometimes in enormous organizations to work out how on earth you get your voice heard. And it doesn't matter how senior or junior you are. And so I think this is relevant wherever you are in your career. It's, how do I make what I am saying heard and valid? And that could be you're not being heard because somebody doesn't think you're important, or you're not being heard because someone doesn't think your discipline is important. So the challenge can sometimes come with, well, how do I make what I'm saying resonate to this person who couldn't give a hoot? I don't care what the legal department has to say. It is irrelevant, and, off I go. Whereas what we're saying is highly relevant. So how do you reach those people? And I think when you are a professional, when you've come from a law firm where people are paying you because they want to hear what you've got to say, and then suddenly you find yourself in a circumstance where actually I don't need to deal with you. It's how you make that flip was one of the biggest learnings I had. Yeah.
And how did you do it?
I think you have to locate it into why that person needs to speak to you, why it matters to them. And I did learn that saying you must talk to is really, I mean, telling someone they must do something really doesn't help at all. It's it's locating it in the relevance. And quite often that's about taking away the legalese and directly applying it to the situation at hand. This matters because it matters to you in this moment. Here's why. Oh, okay. That makes sense. I'll now engage with you.
Yeah. Like, what's in it for them?
Yeah. What's in it for them, and how is it relevant? I mean, I think quite often some of the stuff that I have to deal with can feel so abstracted. It's so wordy. It has lots of technical detail. People's eyes glaze over automatically, and you have to you have to take all of that away. You have to like smash it all away and say, this is actually what it means for us in our business right now and your clients. And then it's relevant.
Yeah. Thank you. Katie, when you think about role models and mentors and sponsors, what impact have they had on your journey?
Lots. So having, as a student, done lots of things by gut instinct, I did quickly work out that probably wasn't the smartest way to behave always through my professional career. And I've had so many amazing mentors and sponsors, and there's a key difference. And I think that's what I always advise people when they're thinking about these relationships to anchor onto, is that they're different. A sponsor's job is to actively sponsor you, to be an advocate for you, to try and get good outcomes for you, whereas a mentor is perhaps someone who you go to for advice and development. I had a really brilliant sponsor at BlackRock who I didn't know terribly well before. So we were smushed together as part of this women's leadership program. And actually the very concentrated way that we worked together changed me fundamentally. Brilliant. I mean, it was like having a power up with him the few times we met. Whereas I also have mentors who I've been lucky enough to stay in touch with for long periods of time, you know, one of them for over 15 years, and I'll actually see him a bit later today. You know, his wisdom means a lot to me. I also believe, having taken advantage of all of these wonderful people's thoughts, you have to pay it forward. So I have spent a lot of time mentoring and sponsoring people. It is a great privilege to come alongside someone in their career journey and think that you might have something useful to share with them. Yeah,
thank you. That's great. So for somebody thinking that they might like to pursue a career in the law, we've talked about, I guess, the traditional route into law, you know, the law degree, and we've talked about the opportunity to do the conversion. Are there any other routes into law?
Yeah, absolutely. And something that in-house legal departments, you know, we can train people directly in-house. And the Law Society has become a little bit more flexible since the hundreds of years ago when I was training and qualifying, in that, you know, you can run it in a much more pragmatic and slightly shorter way now. So if you are someone who finds yourself working in industry right now, maybe right at the start of your career, and you're interested in law, make friends with your in-house legal department and ask them if they've ever thought about maybe training someone in-house alongside them. In-house departments can do that. So you can continue to work in that company, training as a lawyer along the way. So that's a sort of third route that I would share with you. And it's something that I've done in legal departments I've been involved in.
Oh, that's really great. Thank you. When it comes to, I guess, non-technical skills or soft skills, you know, what of those would you call out as you know, useful for aspiring lawyers to have?
Problem solving, the ability to listen, but the ability to turn that and reflect on it and turn it into something which is applied. So I listen to what you need. I understand what you need. I try and turn it into some advice. The ability to influence. The ability to argue non-argumentatively, I would say. So I think, you know, barracking and being belligerent, I've encountered lots of lawyers who think that that's a really appropriate way to achieve anything. It's not. So it's how do you influence through soft power quite often as well. And the ability to build trusted relationships very quickly is very important.
Yeah, great. All great points. Thank you. Katie, what does the future hold for the legal profession?
Oh, that's an absolutely good question. What I hope. So when I'm not wearing my sort of functional hat and being a general counsel, one of the things I've been involved with always in my career and perhaps others of your guests have spoken about it too, is diversity, equity and inclusion initiatives. And what does that really mean? Well, actually, for me, it means creating workplaces which are reflective of the societies in which we live, and which where everybody, regardless of their background and social circumstances, feel that they can build fulfilling careers. I would like a legal profession which continues to offer advancement for underrepresented groups in society, for women, where it just feels like our society around us. And I think the law has made great strides in that regard. Brilliant. 60% of law undergraduates, I think, are women, and good numbers stay in the profession. That's just one stat. I don't have a lot more at my fingertips. But to ensure that the profession continues to remain representative and open and accessible to all. We are fundamentally a profession which represents other people, so we must be representative of them.
I really hope for that too. Thank you, Katie. You mentioned the Law Society. Are there any other resources online or otherwise that you might point someone to who wants to find out more?
Yeah, loads. So I think if the first thing to do is, as we mentioned before, you can be a solicitor or you can be a barrister. So you can just do a bit of poking around on the Law Society website or the Solicitors Regulatory Authority website or the Bar Vocational Council's website. Have a look and see what they have to say about training for the profession. And then just have a look at the websites of some of the law firms, for example, or some of the chambers, if you're thinking about the bar. See what they say in terms of training, see what they say in terms of the way that they show up culturally, what your day-to-day job might look and feel like. I know that it's increasingly hard to get work experience in these places. The schemes that are run to get work experience are often as competitive, if not more so, than actual training places. But if you're interested in the law, try and get some practical experience of it. And you can do that in less conventional ways. There will be legal advice clinics which might want some help. And yes, you need to be qualified to be most helpful, but people can offer administrative support there. It's an example from a number of years ago, but I'll share with you that another member of my family, my mother-in-law, became a lawyer in her 40s. She eventually retired as the senior partner of a law firm, but her first legal experiences was womaning the phones, answering the phones at the Citizens Advice Bureau in North Oxford. So really different. So little, just get yourself out there, think where law can pop up, how might I get some experience of it? And the other thing I would say is, don't be put off by all the people who, as I have just done, will talk about how hard it is to get on these training contracts, all these vacation schemes. If you have talent, if you're capable, someone will spot you and you'll get on. And, law is everywhere. It's in every aspect of what we do. And in order to create robust, safe, resilient, fair, equal societies for us all, we need talented, thoughtful lawyers in every aspect of them.
Yeah, thank you. Katie, as we move towards wrapping up, what do you know now that you wish you'd known back then when you were starting out on your career journey?
That surprisingly, you can be someone like me, so someone who thinks they might want to be a vicar or a midwife. I'm just good with people and therefore I can't do numbers and I can't do commerce. Actually, lo and behold, being good with people is a real advantage to working in a commercial environment. So there is no one type which is successful. What really matters is your openness and your curiosity, and your ability to be a cultural change agent. So don't be put off or deterred by or fearful of what you don't know. Just try to seek to maximize what you do know and be open to learning along the way.
Yeah, thank you. Katie, do you have any favourite quotes or mantras or expressions?
I really don't, because too many. No, too. Oh gosh, what a rubbish answer! Someone who's banged on about how much they love words. No, I don't. I don't have any maxims that I live by. No, sorry, Joe. If anyone's got a good one they'd want to share with me, they should let you know.
Oh, well, that's absolutely fine. What about final words of wisdom or encouragement that you'd like to leave the audience with?
I would say the law is a hugely diverse and enormously rewarding profession. There will be something in it for you if you are intrigued by it. Go for it. Don't be daunted by it. And know that you can make a difference within it, however large and complex it seems.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Katie, I've learned so much today, and I'm quite sure the audience will as well. So thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Oh, not at all. It was my pleasure. I really appreciated and enjoyed our conversation. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you so much for joining Katie and I today. We really hope you enjoyed the show and that deep dive into all things legal. If you found any value in today's episode, please help us out by subscribing to the show and sharing it with your friends. And if you have any questions or comments or suggestions, please get in touch. We love hearing from you. Until next time, have a great week.